I'd like to change the world from where I am. If I don't leave this place, I know I just can't. So, oh, 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 won't you let me know? Oh, 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 where to go? Where to go? I've been hanging inside these walls now for a day. I love the road and I love the stars always.
I'm standing today in front of the controversial statue of Jan van Riebeeck. Why is it controversial? Because some people say that this isn't Jan van Riebeeck at all. But how do they know? I don't think they do, actually, because just by the written word, we know that Jan van Riebeeck was a shortish man, he was balding, and he was slightly overweight. This gorgeous man up here is most certainly not balding, he's definitely not overweight, and he's quite good looking, actually. He's quite a nice looking man, that one is. So probability is it's not Jan van Riebeeck. But now, how did it transpire? Cecil John Rhodes went to London and he asked an artist, which at that stage was considered the Rodin of artists in London, to do a statue of Jan van Riebeeck that he could donate to the Cape. This artist had no idea what Jan van Riebeeck looked like, so he contacted the museum, as one would, in Holland, to ask them for some kind of an image of Jan van Riebeeck. The museum at that time had inherited all of the family portraits from Jan van Riebeeck's family, and a curator of the museum went through these portraits and picked out a portrait that he thought most likely to be Jan van Riebeeck. In 1985, someone else in the museum went through those paintings and said, guys, I think we were mistaken. I don't think that this is actually Jan van Riebeeck. I think this is Vermeulen. And I think that this new painting that I've just found is in fact Jan van Riebeeck. So who knows? Is it Jan van Riebeeck or isn't it Jan van Riebeeck? We actually don't know. But he was quite gorgeous anyway. And now I'm going to introduce you to his wife, Maria. Now I'm standing in front of the statue of Maria de la Celleria. Maria was a French Huguenot. She wasn't Dutch, in fact. And she was Jan van Riebeeck's wife. Now, many people believe that these two statues were done by the same artist, which in fact is incorrect. The Queen of Holland actually commissioned this statue to gift to the South Africans. And the artist that they commissioned had absolutely no images of what Maria looked like. So he did the statue according to his wife. So this, in fact, is the wife of the artist. It's not Maria at all, but it's symbolic, let's say. And where we are right now, where these statues are, is where Jan van Riebeeck and Maria's boat would have stopped in 1652. So right now, I would have been standing pretty much up to here in water. So they would have got onto small boats and gone to Strand Street, to the shore.
At the back of me, we have Table Mountain, known to the first people as Urikwaga. Urikwaga means literally mountain in the sea. We are surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean, Cape Town, the city, down at the bottom. It's not anywhere in the world that you'll have that scenario. So Table Mountain has also got springs, fresh waters that are coming from that mountain and feeding the city. That water was known as Kamisa, which in English interprets to sweet waters. This fountain behind me is at the end of what used to be the pier. And this is where the boats would have gotten to because they couldn't get to Strand Street. The water that you see at the back of me would have once upon a time come all the way at the bottom of these streets, which would have been called grachts. So every street today in Cape Town that has a gracht at the end of it is where water channeled down from the fresh, sweet water from Table Mountain. That was all covered by the English when the bubonic plague hit us, and the English basically believed that it was because of this water that that disease happened. Today, of course, millions of liters of the sweet water runs below the street into the Atlantic Ocean. We are currently in what is the Golden Acre. Behind me, on my left, is the remains of an old reservoir. When they were building this Golden Acre, they came across this remains and found that this was built in the 1700s by Wagenaar. So what used to be an old reservoir leading the water coming down from the mountain via these channels all into the Atlantic Ocean. These are acacia trees as we know them today. But in former years, to the first people, these were known as fever trees because they believed that when they sat under the tree, they got a fever and they died. That's not true. When they sat under these trees, they were stung by mosquitoes with malaria, and they then died, of course, of the malaria, not of the fever. So the painting that you see on these trees is to avoid or prevent traditional healers from debarking them for medicinal purposes. I'm standing in front of the Cenotaph, which is at the end or the lower end of the Herengracht Street. This is a memorial to the soldiers that returned either from the wars or passed on in the wars. Today is the 11th of the 11th month, and it is 11 o'clock. Way back, the tradition of celebrating 2 minutes of silence for the soldiers that lost their lives in the war started all here in Cape Town. 1 minute for the soldiers that lost their lives, the other minute for soldiers that returned. That all brought Cape Town to a standstill. Everybody stopped. Men took off their hats. And that 2 minute silence would be broken by a gentleman on the top of the Cartwright building, where he would blow the bugle and everybody would go back to normal. Can you just imagine that happening today with taxis all over the show? There's no way that they would stop their business for 2 minutes. I'm sitting on the corner of Strand and Adderley Street. Strand in English just means the strand or the beach. This is where the beach used to be. Adderley Street, on the other hand, got its name after a gentleman or a lord, Charles Adderley Boyd. He fought against this whole idea of the English making Cape Town a penal colony, and he won the case in the House of Lords in London. This then shifted the whole idea of moving prisoners onto Australia. And so today, Adderley Street, it's a busy area and we enjoy the sunshine. I'm at the top end of Adderley Street in front of the old Groote Kerk. And the top end of Adderley Street is where all the happening was. Buildings were going up, church was in session, the priest couldn't often be heard when the wagon wheels were trotting over the stone. And what they did was to dampen the sound so that everybody was at peace, was to put in these wooden tiles. And these wooden tiles would then dampen that old wooden wagon wheels.
So these squirrels are brown squirrels that came from America. They originally were taken to England. From England, Cecil John Rhodes imported some squirrels to Groote Kerk, which was his residence. Now these squirrels need to live in areas where there are acorns and also pine kernels, because they can't survive in the Cape on the fynbos that we have here. So these squirrels have never gone further than Swellendam. They never will become a pest because they cannot go any further because they wouldn't survive. Now Cecil John Rhodes also imported something else into South Africa, which was actually a goat, which he brought from a goat which he brought from the Himalayas. Now this goat is a huge goat, so some of you that have been on Table Mountain and you've seen these goats, they're called Tahrs, Tahrs, and they were actually brought here. They were then put into a zoo, and a couple escaped from the zoo, and now they live on Table Mountain. But they're trying to eradicate them because these goats actually can live on the fynbos and have been extremely happy living on the mountain. So when you're hiking and you see some big things on the mountain that you don't know what they are goats. Hello, would you like a... No?
So today I'm standing with Andre Laubscher, who is living for years on Erf, or should we say plot number 81. Andre, thank you for having us. Can you tell us how you got here, what has happened since?
Well, I was stupid enough to buy 2 goats while I was living 3 blocks down the road, and it's through the goats that I discovered the place. The place was at that time, it's a military camp. They used to store ammunition and explosives here, but it was completely empty and it had been abandoned in the late 1980s. I felt uncomfortable about the sort of it being bulldozed over and concreted. I started thinking about what can one do to preserve the place a bit longer, but I couldn't get to a solution. And then one Sunday morning, a stranger walked in. He asked whether he could bring us an 11-month-old baby off the sidewalk, and we eventually took the child in, and we had to work through a welfare organization, and they brought us more children. And then I noticed what happens with children from those circumstances when you put them together with animals. And the concept of the foster farm developed over time, because there are vast numbers of children in need of care.
I'm just listening to the chickens out in the background here, so that whole therapy of children and animals, you know, whether it be dogs, goats, it is a really a good way of getting kids emotionally to kind of de-stress from whatever trauma they've come from.
Yeah, exactly.
And this whole concept of the animals and children has pretty much done good for the kids.
Yeah.
Standing at what we commonly know in Cape Town as the Noonday Gun. Every day at noon, this gun fires for the past few hundred years. Locals, when they're down and around about in Cape Town, they would normally check their watches to make sure their watches are on time. Foreigners, however, would get the shock of their life having to hear this massive cannon shot, you know, almost want to duck for cover.
Fuck. Sorry. Hope she can take that out. Good grief.
But that's the humor that we know locals from foreigners. On the other hand, we have ships traditionally that pass by this bay, and they would look for that puff of smoke to set their navigational equipment to the noonday. Table Mountain is the only mountain in the world that has a star constellation named after it. It's called the Mensa. Mensa in Latin meaning table. In this case, we have the Southern Cross, and there is a very dim star constellation below that. That is the Mensa.
I'm standing between Lion's Head behind me and Signal Hill, or Lion's Rump on that side. Supposedly one can see in this dip on the mountain a crouching lion. Personally, I think you have to finish a bottle or 2 of wine and then you can see whatever you'd like to. I've never seen the supposed lion that's hiding away here. Behind me, I have a Kramat. This Kramat is a holy place in the Muslim faith where they buried a saint or a holy person, and there's a 250-year-old belief in Cape Town that creating a circle of Kramats would protect the people. Now the first Kramat is down in Boer Kerk, just down below us here. This is the second in the circle, Then we have Oudekraal, which is near where the 12 apostles is. And then we go over to Constantia, and then out to the flat part of the Cape, which is Makassar. And the circle is then finished at Robben Island behind us. And in the Pacific, they obviously have earthquakes and they have tsunamis. We don't have anything in the Cape, perhaps because the Kramats are protecting us. Directly behind me, if you look in the direction of where my finger is pointing, that is the Stadsfontein fountain. It's an arched building, and that fountain pumps out millions of liters of water every day, and that water feeds the Greenpoint Common. So we're in Homestead Park at the moment, and all of this water is utilized.
Stadsfontein is a water source just below Table Mountain that feeds this whole Greenpoint Common. The water features, the electricity, all of that is powered by hydropower that is supplied from Stadsfontein. It's November, standing on the human sundial intelligence here, pointing out to my shadow. It's 14:30 hours, so it's pretty much spot on, the human sundial.
During the first Anglo-Boer War, the entire Greenpoint Common was actually a prisoner of war camp. It was full of tents. And the Boer commanders would come in and free the soldiers that were imprisoned here. Obviously, that wasn't okay for the British. So the British would take the soldiers and then move them off to islands as far away as Bermuda. So they went to St. Helena, Bermuda, Sri Lanka, India, to prisoner of war camps over there. And on top of it all, the Boers that had signed allegiance to the Queen, in other words, that had given up the fight, were then housed in concentration camps, which the British started, with the women and the children and the farm workers as well. During that time, the conditions were appalling, and 48,000 of these Boer people and farm workers died at the hands of the British, which is incredibly sad. So this area, which is today utilized by thousands of people, many people don't realize the sad history behind it. While imprisoned on the island of Bermuda, Jabir wrote this poem called The Searchlight. When the searchlight from the gunboat throws its rays upon my tent, then I think of home and comrades and the happy days I spent in the country where I come from and where all I love are yet. Then I think of things and places and of scenes I'll ne'er forget. Then a face comes up before me which will haunt me to the last, and I think of things that have been and happiness that's past, and only then I realize how much my freedom meant when the searchlight from the gunboat casts its rays upon my tent. It must have been a very difficult time for the prisoners of war. Charles Darwin arrived at the Cape here. He was actually just passing through. He had no intention of staying here. When he arrived here, he started studying these rocks because he found them very interesting. And he said at the time, these particular rocks were caused by volcanic action. Everybody in those days said, this guy is absolutely out of his mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Today, they actually say Charles Darwin was right. He was correct all the time.
Where to go? I've been hanging inside these walls now for a day.
So there you have it, some of the awesome features of Cape Town. Do you have a favorite feature of Cape Town? Leave a message below. We would love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that we can keep the magic happening. So don't forget to stay tuned and we will show you where to go.